trusting God with our plans, finding peace in God's sovereignty. Today, I want to share an inspirational message based on a powerful passage from the book of Proverbs, specifically Proverbs 16:1-3. These verses contain profound wisdom that can guide us in our daily lives, especially when it comes to our plans, our ambitions, and the way we approach the future. The verses read, "The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." At the core of these verses is a message about trust, humility, and divine guidance. Let's take a closer look at each verse and explore what it means for us today. First, let's consider verse 1. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. We all have dreams, desires, and plans for our lives. We think about our careers, relationships, goals, and the many things we want to achieve. Making plans is a natural and essential part of life. However, this verse reminds us that while we may formulate plans in our hearts, the final outcome is determined by God. This truth teaches us to acknowledge the sovereignty of God over our lives. No matter how carefully we plan, no matter how much we prepare, we must remember that God has the ultimate control. His wisdom far surpasses ours, and His understanding is perfect. While we see a small part of the picture, God sees the entire canvas. He knows what is best for us, even when we do not. Recognizing God's sovereignty does not mean we should stop planning or dreaming. Instead, it means we should approach our plans with an attitude of humility and openness to God's will. We should be willing to surrender our desires and be ready to follow where God leads. By doing so, we align ourselves with His purposes, which are always good, even if they do not always align with our immediate desires. Next, let's look at verse 2. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. This verse speaks to the human tendency to justify our actions and see ourselves in a favorable light. It is easy to convince ourselves that our plans are good and our motives are pure. We are often quick to validate our choices and decisions based on our understanding and desires. However, this verse reminds us that God sees beyond our outward actions. He looks at the heart and weighs the spirit. God evaluates our motives, intentions, and the true condition of our hearts. He knows our deepest thoughts, even those we might not be fully aware of ourselves. This truth calls us to a deep sense of humility. We must be willing to examine our hearts honestly, acknowledging that our perspective is limited and often biased. We need to ask God to reveal our true motives and to purify our hearts. In practical terms, this might mean asking ourselves questions like, why do I want to pursue this career? What is motivating my desire to make this decision? Am I seeking God's glory or my own? Am I being led by love and compassion, or by pride and selfish ambition? When we approach our plans with a humble heart, seeking God's guidance and truth, we open ourselves to His correction and direction. God's purpose is to lead us into what is truly best for us. Even if it requires refining and changing our plans, this process may not always be comfortable, but it is essential for our growth and alignment with God's will. Now, let's focus on verse 3. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. This verse is both a command and a promise. It instructs us to commit our work to the Lord, which means entrusting everything we do to Him. It involves acknowledging God as the source of our strength and the guide of our endeavors. To commit our work to the Lord is to say, God, I trust you with my life, my plans, my efforts, and my future. The promise that follows is that when we do this, our plans will be established. This does not mean that God will give us everything we want or that our lives will go exactly as we have planned. Rather, it means that God will establish our plans according to His perfect will. He will direct our steps, guide our actions, and bring about the outcomes that are best for us. Trusting God with our plans requires faith. It means believing that God's wisdom is greater than ours and that His love for us is unending. It means letting go of control and allowing God to take the lead. This can be challenging, especially when we are faced with uncertainty, challenges, or when things do not go as we hoped. However, when we trust God, we can find peace, knowing that He is in control and that His plans for us are good. So, how do we apply these principles from Proverbs 16:1-3 in our everyday lives? First, make plans, but hold them loosely. It is wise and good to make plans, set goals, and work towards them. However, we must hold our plans loosely, with a willingness to change direction if God leads us in a different way. We should regularly bring our plans before God in prayer, seeking His guidance and asking for His will to be done. By doing so, we acknowledge that our understanding is limited and that we need God's direction. Second, examine your heart. Before making decisions or pursuing goals, take time to examine your motives. Ask God to reveal any selfish or impure motives and to give you a heart that seeks His glory above all else. Be willing to let go of plans that are not in line with God's will. Even if it means making difficult choices or sacrifices, trust that God knows what is best for you and that He will lead you in the right path. Third, trust in God's timing. Often, we become impatient when things do not happen as quickly as we would like. We may feel frustrated when our plans do not unfold as we hoped. Remember that God's timing is perfect, and His delays are not denials. Trust that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating events in your life for your good. Be patient and keep trusting, knowing that God's plans will be established in His perfect time. Finally, commit everything to God. In all that you do, commit your work to the Lord, whether it's your career, your relationships, your studies, or your personal goals. Bring them before God and ask for His blessing and guidance. Trust that God will establish your plans according to His will. When you commit your work to the Lord, you invite His presence into every area of your life, and you open yourself to His leading. In conclusion, Proverbs 16:1-3 calls us to a life of trust and surrender to God. It teaches us to make our plans with humility, recognizing God's sovereignty and trusting Him with the outcomes. It reminds us to examine our hearts, ensuring that our motives are pure and aligned with God's will. And it invites us to commit our work to the Lord, trusting that He will guide us and establish our plans. As we live out these principles, we will experience the peace and confidence that comes from knowing that our lives are in God's hands. We will find joy in following His leading, knowing that His plans for us are good and His purposes are perfect. Let us, therefore, commit our hearts, our plans, and our lives to the Lord, trusting in His wisdom, His love, and His perfect will. Thank you.